Hey, it's Alexander again, and this time I'd like to talk about certificate management because certificates is what OPC UA heavily uses for all the secure mechanisms that we have. Now, whenever we talk about security, then the folks or the security experts are quite interested in the details or are very strict on the details. And therefore, we do have some implications here because I want to keep the recording short or the session short. And therefore, I'm outlining some of the things. So take a minute to pause the video here and go through the slide because I will skip it for now. When talking about OPC UA security, we do have different options for handling the certificates. Of course, you can go with a self-signed certificate, which is what most applications are using by default in the beginning. So when they fire up the first time and they start themselves, then they generate a self-signed certificate if no certificate has yet been assigned to them. In such a case, the issuer is basically the application itself. So it assists itself that it's trustworthy. The problem or the downside with such self-signed certificates is that you always need to trust them individually. So you need to make sure that the server is aware of all the clients which are going to connect to him and have all of them separately in its trust list, as well as the clients need the server certificates. Now, the problem with that is that depending on what kind of application you're looking at, for PLCs, for example, this sometimes even means that you need to restart your PLC program. So this is not necessarily the best, and it becomes even worse from a management perspective because you won't just have one application or 3 applications as in this example, but you probably have like tens of clients as well as hundreds of servers. And you basically end up walking with a USB stick through your facility and copy those certificates individually into the trust lists. Now you can see that this is not necessarily good from a maintenance perspective, but luckily certificate management with OPC UA, just like any other certificate management, has a solution for that. And we are utilizing a concept from the industry, which is certificate authorities, so-called CAs. Now, CAs allow to structure certificate hierarchies. So what you can do is you can have a root CA as we have it here in the example. You have intermediate CAs to just have a better organization, and then you have the so-called leaf CAs. That is then the not CA but certificate, and they are then really for the individual applications. So we can now create some structure. And what you already see on the right-hand side is that, of course, any CA or intermediate CA can issue multiple other certificates. So in this example here, we're talking about a factory north and a factory south. So the beauty here is it really eases the organization of trust relationships and allows a big number of variations and different scenarios to be addressed, as well as having a central management for those certificates. So let's walk through the different CA scenarios that we have. Now, what you could do is you can put a CA certificate into a trust list. What this would result in is that every certificate which is issued by this CA will be automatically trusted for incoming connections. So at the end, what happens here is that the server application in our example will accept any client application, no matter whether they are coming from the factory north, the factory south, or from any other factory. Now, obviously, this is usually not necessarily the scenario that you want to have in your facility because you want to protect yourself against, for example, lost notebooks or applications, devices which have been moved from one facility to another. So you want to reduce the number of allowed incoming connections. And you can do that by the so-called issuer trust lists or the issuer lists, which would have a slightly different meaning. So what you see here is that the root CA is not at the end, not anymore in the trust list, but instead it's placed in the certificate folder of the issuers. The reason for that is that with OPC UA, you're always required to have the complete certificate chain validated on incoming connections. So you need to know that the signature in the certificate that is being sent to you matches the one that you're expecting. So you need to have an option to verify this. The intermediate CA in our scenario here is then placed in the trust list in the certs folder. And now what happens here is that all certificates issued by the factory north CA will now be accepted for incoming connections. So when an HMI from factory south tries to connect, or a maintenance notebook from factory south or any other factory, it would not be allowed to connect to the OPC UA server. And this is something that is a more common scenario in the industry. Of course, for very strict access control, you could also have the leaf certificates in the trust list. So you can basically just add that for any level, the whole concept that we just described for every level in your hierarchy. So now what we're doing is we only want to allow incoming connection from HMI A to our OPC UA server. So what we're doing is we place the HMI A application certificate into the certs trust folder, and we make the other two, so the factory north CA as well as the company root CA, available in the issuers folders. Now this allows us to validate a complete chain while only allowing incoming connections by HMI A. So you see that you can always also just handle very strict requirements here. Now I want to finish off with just some brief explanations or a short summary on example that we all know from our daily lives, which is comparing the certificate strategies that we have right here between the IT and us in the OT. So I think that all of us are used to utilize mail servers as well as web servers. Now, what is the big difference here? The difference here is that you have a global trust list. So basically you have certain authorities which are known to be trusted because they validate the receiver of a certificate before they issue it. For example, like VeriSign, GlobalSign, and others. And what happens now is that when you use a browser and you go to such a website, it will validate, the browser will validate that the certificate being sent by the web server is matching your expectations. So basically the URL you're trying to access. Now on the web server side, they will basically allow any incoming certificate. And this is a big difference here to the OT, because in the OT, what we are doing, of course, is we want to establish trust specific between two certain applications. So for us, accepting any incoming connection is usually not the way that you want to go. The other main difference here is that because of in the ITD requirement that all those different browsers can have access to those certificate authorities and to those issuers, they need to be maintained by those companies, which also involves costs. Now on the OT side, the end user, the operator, is the one who is controlling the certificate management. So it's also the company that is controlling the CAs. And therefore, the whole thing is self-managed, and the costs are now depending on the solution the end user chooses. Now, if they want to have something by themselves, they can do that without having any cost. So you can issue as many certificates as you like by your own CA structure without any implications or any kind of warnings that this is an untrusted CA once you have it in the trust list, obviously. Now, with OPC UA, you already have heard that having a big scenario with a lot of different OPC UA applications is a big problem here because the maintenance is quite high. Now, this is actually also the kind of the case with IT. So when you need to renew a certificate for a web server, then you need to go to your issuer again, so to the company which provided you the certificate, and you need to repurchase a renewal and then update your web server. Now with OT and OPC UA, all of that is standardized by using the GDS, which we already heard about from Randy Armstrong in the security sessions, as well as from Jim Loof in his global services session. So OPC UA really helps here, and that is basically where I want to go to with my summary. The certificate management via this GDS is very simple and easy because that really eases the maintenance here quite a lot. With having all the different structures like self-signed and certificate authorities, you can have a different or a big number of different scenarios covered. And the important thing here is to state that the support for both self-signed certificate as well as CAs is required and therefore be supported by all compliant OPC UA products. And also a very important detail, there's no way around this certificate management, so you need to make yourself aware of it because security is mandated in OPC UA. Now, in the past, we had some exceptions for really tiny resource-restricted devices which could not do or handle RSA operations. But now with having ECC built into the standard, those exceptions are not valid anymore, and therefore security is now required for all kind of applications out there. I really hope that this helped getting your head around OPC certificate management and that you enjoyed this session. Thank you.